So hi, I'm Stephanie Ahlschwede and this is Lisa Maupin, and we're from United Methodist Ministries in the Nebraska Annual Conference. We're here today to talk about days of service and how you might go about planning one and some strategic information that might help you with success for that. First, we wanted to talk about why you would do a day of service. There are both pros and cons to that. One of the best things about a day of service is that it can be a real rallying point for starting a new ministry or a new program. And having a particular date on the calendar does help make sure that the event actually happens. So it's a good gateway to future relationship building and service in the community. Some negatives to think about are just not everyone's always available the same day. Sometimes a day that seems really good to one person is a tragic mistake for somebody else. And if you're working with agencies in your town or community, some of them may not be as open or have as many staff people available to assist you on weekends. Some things to think about as you look at your day of service are, who is it that you expect to come help? Is it everybody? Is there a focus age group that you want to think about? Again, thinking about the date, being careful to check with more than one person in your community. So for instance, sometimes people remember that Mother's Day is not the best weekend to schedule an event, but we might not all be aware of when prom season is, or sporting events that are seasonal, and those are things to check with more than one person about. Another thing to think about is, what is it that you will be doing? Does your congregation or group already have an idea of something, or are you going to work with community partners and ask them what the area of greatest need is? Those are some things to think about just as you're setting up the idea to implement for the day of service. Now, some things to think about, what we'll talk about, are both specifics and then strategies for success. And we wanted to talk a little bit about specific logistics to think about. Once you know you want to have a day of service, there's a couple details that it's really helpful to get taken care of first in order to implement your strategies. So I wanted to ask Lisa about that. She organizes our details for days of service. And first, Lisa, tell me about how you know where it is that the group will gather.
Actually, when you pick the place for the group to gather, it's a lot of times if it's one church, then you choose your your church location and those kind of things. If you're inviting multiple groups and it's an all-church effort, think it strategically about who has a really good space so that when you sit in, that's accessible, so that people of all ages and all physical abilities can get into the space. Who has a really good parking lot for people to feel comfortable parking in that. And also, if you're providing transportation like a bus, what is a good parking lot to get in and out of to make sure that those kind of things happen. You also want to know who is it where strategically that location is placed. So if you're going to be working in a specific area of town, it's not a good idea to choose a location that's clear halfway across town to make that happen, because that cuts into your amount of transportation time into your day of service. So you want to also find either a partner location or a place that you can gather that is near where you're going to serve. But it's really important to have that initial gathering spot for people to check in, to do initial instructions, all of those kind of things.
Now, that has to do with where you start and end your day. But with a day of service, often you go somewhere to serve. And some models involve everyone going to one place. Sometimes people split up. Tell us more about how you know if you are going to one or more places and how you might find those places.
It's really a simple thing. You ask your partners. All too often we have an assumption, oh, it's a big space, they can handle all of our volunteers. And that might not be the case. So what I usually do when I talk to my community partners is I have a gauge in my head of how many I might expect to show up. So let's say I have in my head, I have 60 people. It could be more than that, it could be less, but I'm going with the idea that there's more than likely an interest of about 60 people. Then I start calling locations to say, hey, we're going to do this day of service. I ask them if they're available, but then I ask a very specific question. What is the range? What is the number of people can you handle? Because a site appreciates being asked that question. Because then they're like, well, then we'll have enough work for 15 people. Or we have enough work for 20 people. Or I have one site that I dearly love that'll say, oh, we'll take 30 to 40 people. Not all sites can do that. And so really asking that question up front is extraordinarily important. Not only because it creates a really good relationship with that site, but also it creates an environment in which your volunteers are happy because there'll always be enough work for them to do. They'll feel like they're valued and they're having a place in everything.
One of the things to think about when you think about a day of service and where you're going is that you want to be responsive not just to the needs of your volunteers, but the needs of whoever it is you're attempting to help. So some places will have more specific needs. For instance, if it's a homeless shelter for youth, they're going to want to be especially cautious about the privacy of their clients. If your customer that you're serving is a public park, it will have fewer needs and likely can take more volunteers. But if it's raining that day, it may not be available after all. So no matter where it is that you're serving, it's helpful to think about what are the needs of that physical location or the people at it. And as you determine how many people are going, send an appropriate number of people for that space. Lisa, sometimes at our events we end up feeding people because the event's more than an hour long. Tell us about some of your strategies for feeding volunteers who are working on a site.
How the food works is that we actually, with the pre-registration count, we do that. And then we have a partnership. We create a partnership with a local business. We feel it's really important to also have that relationship with them. What we do is we make sure the lunches that are delivered to the starting point location. So then what happens is that that people on their way out the door, they grab a lunch and then they get onto the bus or onto that point of transportation. The reason that we do that is that also it provides a break as well within the work, so that the team then is encouraged to sit down and have that meal together to talk about some of the work that they're doing, kind of touch base again, and use it as an educational piece as well. And so then one of the things that I will tell you is that it's a really simple thing, but make sure that in your equipment that you have ready for the lunches is that each site leader, the person that's kind of like in charge of that site, has a box to collect all the lunches in, so that when they get off the bus, all the lunches are together. And then also it's a place to collect the trash following the lunches, and it just alleviates a little bit of pressure on the site for that, just what to do with the trash and recyclables.
We had a similar thing happen with transportation. I remember when we started doing days of service, it seemed like a very good idea for youth and their adults to come in a car, and then we'd send those cars out to various sites. We figured out that that wasn't always the best thing for us. Part of what we do at our day of service, and we'll talk about this, is we have a debriefing at the end, which we think is very important to do some formative learning. And so we found that people might get done early and they'd go off to the Dairy Queen and maybe never come back. And then another group would go to a soccer game that maybe we didn't know about, so we lost some people. Lisa, tell us a little bit more about how we moved to having buses take people to their sites from our home site out to do the work and then back again.
We moved into that transportation because of a lot of the things that Stephanie was talking about. What we found out was that with by using yellow school buses, and I can't stress the fact that I would always encourage you to use more of a yellow school bus and less of a tour bus. And the reason is, first of all, cost is a big factor of it. They can hold, I actually know this, they can hold 47 people. The other part of it is, so like really, a day of service for 100, you can get by with just 2 buses. The other part about it is that it doesn't become a visual of a bunch of people from a different area coming in to serve into an impoverished area. You blend in a little bit better. It becomes more of a community kind of feeling, and it's less of a noticeable factor. The other part with the buses that I find is that it is also an educational piece. A lot of times our volunteers are going into areas or places that they may not have ever been before. They're seeing things that they may or may not have seen before, and so this is an opportunity to provide a little bit of education, kind of like saying, this is maybe a part of your town or your city that people don't know about, or a part of your county that people have never been to, and so it provides that. The other part too is we found that by using the buses, there's a level of camaraderie that's built up by the people that are on the bus.
Yes.
It is not uncommon for songs to break out. It is not uncommon for people to kind of meet new people while they're riding the bus together.
And when we get back to the home site, they often all sit together because they've got orange bus or blue bus pride.
Yes.
So that they they bond in that area. Now, recognize that we're doing this in an urban area which has a school system that buses people. The application of this to a smaller area that maybe you don't rent buses in is just think ahead of time about how you're transporting people. Are the vehicles that you're using safe, and will they blend in fairly well with the environment to which you are going? Now, those are, I think, the key elements. And then with that, make sure that people know your expectation is that they'll start and end the day with you. Something else to think about is bling. Some of our events come with bling, for instance, a t-shirt, and some events don't come with bling. And that's something I think to think about. What we've found is that people, when we give them t-shirts, they do wear them around. So think about what's on that shirt. I'd say that if it's a congregation and it's your first time out doing something as a group, rather than having the event name on your shirt, you might think about having it be your church name. And then people can use that other times when you're going out in public doing things together. I know I had a church I served in South Omaha, and we put the church name on shirts. Everyone gave them out, and those, anytime we went anywhere, they wore them to church, they wore them to baseball games. They really appreciated that, and I was glad it was our church name on the front and not an event name, so people knew about our church. Do you have thoughts on how to know if you are going to have bling, how you organize that, and what the cost might be?
With making that determination, is it something that you want to do? Because actually having t-shirts at an event or a bling at that event is a little bit of extra work, and it also requires a lot of work on your pre-registration side, making sure that you have a deadline set so that your t-shirt vendor can get things printed in time for you, or you can get them shipped to you in the time that you need. Also making sure that you have the right sizes, and so that's a little bit, and in designing and layout, one of the things that, a couple things to remember, and it's really kind of a thing that you normally don't think about, is the color of the t-shirt. And the reason that color makes a difference is, are you doing a painting project? Because if you're doing a painting project, is a white t-shirt a good idea? Because then everybody's going to be splattered with paint and those kind of things. Also, is it in the middle of the summertime? Is somebody going to be self-conscious if there's a lot of sweat marks on a dark t-shirt? All of these kind of things factor in, as well as thinking about, too, going back to the idea of a construction or a painting project when you hand out your t-shirts. I know that there's a feeling that we want everybody to wear their t-shirt on that day to celebrate, and so that it's marked that we're doing this. But if somebody goes and, let's say there's painting a picnic shelter and they get paint on their shirt, then that limits their ability to wear the t-shirt post-event. So are you prepared to maybe provide extra t-shirts if you want people to wear them on that day, are you prepared to provide extra t-shirts to people who may have, quote, quote, ruined their t-shirt in the process of the service, or made it so that it was something that they wouldn't wear post-event?
So as a person on staff who studies the t-shirt situation, I'll tell you two things. Our rule is people get their shirts after the event. And our second thing just to know is you will never have the exact sizes ordered in the right quantity. So either just be mentally prepared to do a reorder, or that some people will be wearing something 3 sizes too small or large, or order souvenir shirts afterwards. We have an algorithm for calculating exactly what we need, and it does not work. So just go into this, if you've got t-shirts involved, be at peace and know that it will not work out the way you planned it, and that's going to be okay as long as you know ahead of time it's going to be okay.
One of the things that we've added into as part of the t-shirts thing, because it is one of those things that you never always have the sizes that you need, is asking registrants, are you willing to go up or down a size? And sometimes that helps in the flexibility and preparing people for the flexibility with the t-shirts.
So let's talk a little bit about registration for an event. And if there are 5 of you on the day of service, registration may be a little bit less complicated. But once you end up with at least 10 people, we find that there's some details that it's very helpful to cover. We've gotten over time better and better having people actually register and tell us they're coming. Part of that is because if people show up without being registered, then they know they may not get to participate because there may not be room on the bus, and they may not get their souvenir t-shirts. So you can kind of incentivize people letting you know that they're going to participate. First, let's talk about release forms. What do we do with release forms?
One of the things that is really important, especially if you're doing something along the lines with youth, is that you have some sort of a release form. And it's a release form that is part of your registration, even when they sign up, that there's an understanding about a liability issue in case they are injured during the volunteer time. Also, there's also you add a photo permission in that. So if somebody is going around taking public relations photos, that a person has signed a release form that it's okay to use their photo in publicity materials. The other thing with youth is that there's an understanding that the parent or the guardian knows that their youth is participating in this and that they're okay with that. And it's a really important. It's one of those things that the reason it's important is that it's a safety protection for your sites and for you in the organization and your participants, and it's a really important thing. And there are a lot of examples of different release forms that you can do with your volunteer groups.
Yeah. If we care about the people we're serving with, we will protect them by making sure that they and whoever's responsible to sign off on things everyone knows that they are with us on purpose for that day. Mm-hmm. With photos, that's really important, I think. There's another end of photos. Even if you have a photo release permission from everyone that's participating on your end of the project, keep in mind you do not have that permission from the sites that you're visiting. And so we're very specific with our volunteers. We are not taking photos of people whose permission we do not have at sites. So you're at a homeless shelter, you're not taking pictures of those guests without their permission. And if you're taking photos of the site, we're doing it in such a way that people's faces can't be identified. That's an issue of respect. It could be an issue of liability. I think if you know people with small children, they'll tell you that they can be very sensitive about who it is that's taking photos of their children, especially if those adults are people they do not know who are taking photos of their kids. So that's something you can build awareness about just by asking your own folks to do that release form. And it's something it'd be smart to revisit as you send people out to do their work. We've talked about t-shirt size. We know that many people do not know their t-shirt size, so ask for that and just know there's no way that you'll have. If you get the perfect number of t-shirts, we want to know about it. We will create your certificate. Let's see. Sometimes we have youth come. Lisa, tell us how we register teams and how we make sure we have enough adults to have a ratio of adults to children and youth. Mm-hmm.
There's a difference with working with youth as opposed to working with adults. Adults registering on an individual basis is a really good idea and a good way to go about it. With youth, we register them as a team, and there's a lot of reasons that we do that. First of all, because then that you have contact with the youth group leader who is your communicator with their youth about what to expect and some of the things that may come up at the last minute. The other part too is with youth, you know that there are youth, and so there are certain sites that you cannot send youth to. There are certain sites that will not take people under the age of 16. And so knowing that, or knowing what are youth appropriate sites, are also helpful in that process. The other part too is that you want to make sure there's adequate ratio between adults and youth. One of the gauges that we use is one adult to every 5 youth. And that is one of the things that we really hone in on, because having that, and adults that your youth are comfortable with them at the site is extraordinarily helpful. If there are questions that come up, there are problems, anything along those lines, supervising all of those things is extraordinarily helpful. And so that's why we have youth register in teams as opposed to on an individual basis, so that we know that there is a proper adult to youth ratio.
Yeah. If you have youth and adults come to your day of service and you count up and find that you have more than 5 youth per adult, I would urge you to stop right there, make a phone call, or change your plan, because you want to protect both those youth and those adults by having appropriate supervision. The other assumption that we have is that when youth come with adults who know them and work with them at their youth group, is that those adults have had protection policy training. That's not just for a legal reason you want that. You want that because we are smart and good stewards of all of God's creation. That includes the children and youth that we work with. So that's another reason to have adults that are familiar and who have had that training come with those youth. So let's think about the actual day of the event. You've figured out what you're going to be doing. You know who's coming. You may or may not have ordered t-shirts. The thing that we have that's our best advice for the day of is this. Have a specific timeline that you and the people who are helping lead the groups involved all know, so you're very clear about what you think is going to happen when. Now, it won't be a to-the-minute timeline, but Map out how long you think it will take to get everybody together in the space before you send them forth. Map out how much time you think it will take for them to get wherever they're serving. Map out how much time you think lunch will take. And that will help everybody have a framework time-wise. And then if you need to be flexible, if you've got a group that's taking too long, they'll know they've taken long, and they'll know to call you so you don't wonder where they are. That's probably our best advice for the day of. Now, thinking about, you've gone to serve, you've come back. We think it's really important to bring people back together to debrief the day. Knowing that you'll just touch the surface, people need time to process, but a really important part of learning is comparing your new information to the old information that you had and seeing what your new reality is because of the experience you've just had. So, in a debriefing, you might ask some questions of everybody, just what is it that you did? Was there something that surprised you? Is there something new that you learned? And have the group have that experience of sharing it. And that's one reason you do a day of service, because you get the wisdom and the perspective of that entire group, not just yourself. It's important to volunteer as an individual as well, but at a day of service, you have that wealth of information that you gather from that whole group. The next thing is that I think often we think, okay, we're done, goodbye, but you're not done yet because you have not conducted an evaluation. And an evaluation can be very simple. You might just ask people, what is it that you learned? Do you think you'll do this again? Do you have any suggestions? Our suggestion is never ask a question to which you do not want to know the answer. So if you do not want to know that they did not like their lunch, do not ask them if they liked it. Only ask if you really want to know. If you do not want suggestions, do not ask for suggestions, right? Only ask what you want to know. And you can keep it very simple. You're going to know why it is you thought it was a good idea to do a day of service. Probably stick with that and say, so if you think, well, we are doing a day of service to kind of rally people to go forward and do more work, you might say, as a result of this day of service, do you feel more inclined to volunteer? Or as a result of today, do you want to learn more about our community partners that we could work with more? Something like that. And that process of doing the evaluation and that debriefing will help your folks know what it is that they learned. So when people say, what did you learn at your day of service? How was your Saturday? They'll be able to remember because they've actually already said it once. Now, we want to talk a bit about justice and advocacy. Anytime that we're doing service, that's in the context of our community and our culture and of justice issues. So it's natural that if you're working in a food bank, you might ask the question, why are there people that are hungry? If you are working, sometimes we end up with people at a humane society and they'll say, why are we doing this? And we'll say, well, it's not because dogs are people too, but it's because that part of our community, that part of God's creation needed help. Anytime you're doing service, it can evoke questions about why it is that that work is needed. That's a good place to start to do advocacy work, either to use that as a jumping off point to research what the current situation is and what can be done. You as an organizer may know ahead of time some of the themes that you might be working with. Often we find that days of service are related to hunger. If that's the case, you could try the Bread for the World website and get information about an offering of letters there. You might, in Nebraska, be able to go to the Nebraska Appleseed website, other advocacy sites, to either download a postcard campaign or basic information. You don't have to convince anybody of anything, but if you provide information for people to learn about underlying issues, people can draw their own conclusions and figure out how it is that they would like to work on the justice issues and advocate for change that then affects that work that we do that's missional or in that moment of need. To be an advocate, you do not have to march on the unicameral. You do not have to have a parade or a rally. Advocacy includes writing letters, making phone calls, and learning enough about an issue to be able to educate the people around you. All of that's valuable and important, and often we find that people choose to do more advocacy as a result of service because they can see specific examples of how advocacy helps specific people. And that's one reason to serve, is to help us think more intentionally and specifically about what advocacy can look like. We're wrapping up here. We wish you well in your endeavors. If you want to have a pilot run, feel free to come to one of our days of service. We'd welcome you to that. You can find out more at our website, which is bigmuddyumc.org. As you go about your planning, I think you want to think of those basics, the who, what, where, when, and why. Once you know those, you'll be able to figure out a flow for your day. And remember that Jesus didn't ask us to be perfect. We're asked to try and to serve and to do our best. And so anything that goes wrong, you will learn from for the next time. And maybe at your debriefing, you'll have some, not a disaster, but a glitch. And that will be worthy of conversation. People will learn from that. They'll learn how to be gracious in the midst of the things that we can't control, which is, well, a pretty basic fundamental for Christianity. So we know you can do this, and give us a holler if we can help you, and feel free to come visit us in Omaha.